Hi everyone, this is part 2 of chapter 10 of Global Woman by Arlie Hochschild, and I'm just going to jump into it. This chapter is called Selling Sex for Visas, Sex Tourism as a Stepping Stone to International Migration. It starts with sex workers' stories. Elena, 22, when I met her, had initially migrated from the countryside to Sasua's sex trade after the father of her baby girl left her. She followed her older sister, who was also working in the sex trade at the time. Elena became the main breadwinner for her extended family. She brought remittances back home to pay her parents' monthly colmado bill, and she eventually became the surrogate mother for 2 younger sisters, a stepsister and a younger sex worker who came to rely on her. All these girls, plus Elena and her daughter, lived in a one-room shack where they rotated between sharing the bed and sleeping on the floor. In addition to being generous, Elena was a leader to whom other women in the community turned for advice. It was little surprise to her friends that she, literate and savvy, turned a fax relationship with a middle-aged German man into what many of them called a marriage. After returning several times to spend time with Elena, Jürgen decided to move to Sasua. He would return to Germany only a few months out of the year to supervise his construction company, which would support him for the rest of the year in his new Caribbean lifestyle. To Elena and her friends, she appeared to be living out a fantasy. She had quit sex work and set up house with a German man. Elena's friends and her older sisters envied the 2-bedroom apartment with running water, electricity, and a full kitchen that she, Jürgen, and all of her dependents, her daughter and 3 younger sisters, now inhabited. But her actual relationship with Jürgen was far from ideal. Soon after Jürgen moved to town, Elena found out that she was pregnant. At first, he was helpful around the house and doted on Elena, but the novelty eventually wore off, and he returned to his routine of spending most days drinking in the German-owned bar beneath their apartment. He also went out drinking every night with German friends. Most of the time he was drunk, and Elena saw him less and less frequently. What's more, he did not treat her any better than the previous Dominican men in her life had. The couple constantly fought over money, which Jürgen controlled tightly. Since they were living together and Jürgen was paying the bills, including private school tuition for her daughter, Elena considered them to be married. As her husband, in a consensual union, Jürgen was financially responsible for the household, in Elena's view, but she felt that he was not fulfilling this role. "Why isn't he giving me any money? He is my esposo, husband, and is supposed to give me money," she complained to me. "I need to know if he is with me or someone else. He pays for this house and paid for everything here. I need to know what is going on." They fought so regularly that Elena started sleeping on the couch. One day, without warning, Jürgen packed his bags and left for Germany on business. Elena had no cash flow into the household. In Jürgen's absence, Elena took her daughter out of private school since the tuition was overdue. She started working in a small Dominican-owned restaurant. When Jürgen returned a couple of months later, they split up for good. Elena and her family returned to living in a shack without running water or electricity. She had not accumulated any savings or items she could pawn during her time with Jürgen. When they vacated their apartment, he took most of the furniture and the television with him. In many ways, Elena had been better off, financially and emotionally, before she'd met Jürgen. Even though she appeared to have all the coveted trappings that came with marrying a foreign tourist, she ended up returning to the same conditions of poverty as before. What's more, her relationship with a foreign man replicated many of the failings sex workers so often criticize in their relationships with Dominican men. Jürgen turned out to be a volatile alcoholic who slept with other women, thus putting Elena and possibly her baby at risk for acquiring AIDS. Moreover, soon after he returned to Sasua, Jürgen set up house with another sex worker. He now lives, Elena hears, somewhere in Asia. Elena's experience with Jürgen raises an important question. To what degree are the sex workers' fantasies about foreign men shaped by experience of migrating to Sasua? Studies reveal that the experience of migration, combined with wage labor, often increases women's social and economic independence and status. Dominican women who migrate internally for the sex trade, however, find their gender roles both reaffirmed and reconfigured. Although the sex trade allows women to outlearn male Dominican migrants in Sasua, they lack any similar source of authority or independence in their relationships with foreign men. In fact, they become completely dependent on these men, not only for money, but often for much else. The case of Nancy, a sex worker who moved to Germany, illustrates this phenomenon. Unlike most sex workers who explain their transnational relationships in terms of economic strategy, Nancy recounted a love story. "This is completely for love," she gushed. Frank was a German man close to her age. She was 23 and he 28. He spoke Spanish and got along well with her 3-year-old son. He bought her a plane ticket and helped her get a tourist visa so she could visit him in Germany for a month. When she returned, she showed me pictures of her visit, including pictures of Frank's parents and their middle-class home. Frank and Nancy agreed never to tell his family or friends that she had been a sex worker. But since they decided to marry and made plans for Nancy to move to Germany with her son, she feared that they would find out. A former co-worker of Nancy's, Rosa, lived 30 miles away from Frank's family with a German man she had also met in Sosua's sex trade. Rosa's mother-in-law knows what Rosa did in Sosua, Nancy worried, and she knows I'm a friend of Rosa's. What if she ever said anything to Frank's parents? Nancy's ties to Sosua put a new twist on the importance of social networks and the migration process. The nascent networks linking Sosuan sex workers to towns in Germany can be sources of both support and concern for sex workers turned migrants. In many instances, women prefer struggling in isolation in their new European settings to being found out. After marrying and living in Germany for a year, Frank and Nancy moved to Sosua, where they had a little girl together. But soon afterward, Frank ran off with another Dominican sex worker and stopped all financial support to Nancy and her children. Nancy went to a lawyer and got Frank to pay child support, which lasted for 1 month. There is little that Nancy can do now, since Frank and this other woman have moved to Germany. Like Elena, Nancy has experienced a reversal of fortune. She and her 2 children now live in a 2-room shack in Sosua, under much worse conditions than when I first met her, before she married Frank. I was quite shaken to see that the one relationship I knew of that seemed to grow out of love, respect, and romance had crumbled. Despite this turn of events, Nancy returned to sex work and continued to depend exclusively on foreign men for her income. Another sex worker, Carmen, adopted a different strategy, diversifying her risk in the sex trade by working with both foreign and Dominican men. She supplemented unpredictable income from foreign tourists by establishing long-term relationships with Dominican amigos or clientes fijos, regular clients, who supplied her with a small but steady income. Annie, another sex worker, explains the function of amigos. You don't always have a client. You need amigos and clientes fijos. If you have a problem, like something breaks in your house, or your child is sick and you need money for the doctor or medicine, they can help. After 4 years of sex work, Carmen has saved enough money to build a small house for her mother and children in Santo Domingo. I asked her why she thinks she was able to save money while so many of her friends in Sosua did not have an extra centavo. She replied, "Because they give it to their men. Their husbands wait at home and drink while their women work. Not me. If I'm in the street with all the risks of disease and the police, I'm keeping the money or giving it to my kids. I'm not giving it to a man. No way." She was careful not to let the men in her life know how much money she had saved or where it came from. While she was involved with the Belgian client who later declined to answer her letter, she says, "I did not tell him I am building the house. I don't have money, and it would seem like I do." She also kept the possibility of her moving to Belgium and the information gathering trip she and the client took to the Belgian embassy in Santo Domingo from Jorge, her young Dominican amigo. The nephew of the owner of the boarding house where Carmen lived. Jorge visited her periodically from Santiago, about 2 hours from Sosua. "He is very young," she told me, scrunching up her nose disapprovingly. "He lives with his mother in Santiago and works in a zona franca. He gives me money, even though he does not make a lot." Jorge was her economic safety net, especially in times of crises. At times, the money Jorge gave Carmen was the only money she had. Though these sums were smaller than the transnational money wires other sex workers received, it was money she could count on regularly. Living with foreign men, fantasies versus realities. Because migrating to Europe is a relatively new phenomenon, not many former sex workers, Nancy is an exception, have returned to Sosua to dispel the myths and gossip of an easy and fantasy-filled life a la over there. Instead, the women imagine that foreign men will provide them with material comfort and possibly better treatment. They dream of European men rescuing them from a lifetime of poverty and foreclosed opportunities. They expect to trade love and romance for financial security and mobility. After all, these relationships are for residencia, not for amour. Even after relationships end and women return to Sosua broke, sex workers in the Sosua community often still idealize their failed immigration stories. Jürgen's alcoholism, for example, and his fighting with Elena were never mentioned in the gossip mill. Elena's friends focused on the money he gave her to feed the household, not on the fact that she did all the chores, the food shopping and preparation, on top of all the other household chores. Similarly, Nancy's friends never mentioned the social and economic isolation she suffered when they spoke of her time in Germany. And while Carmen's careful hedging strategy earned her snickers from sex workers who disdained lower-paying Dominican clients, she became the talk of the sex work community when she later married an Austrian man and moved to Austria. Because actually going to Europe is a rare prize, sex workers often talk about what they would do to make the most of it if they won the opportunity to migrate. Sex workers fancy that they would do what Andrea did. After marrying her German boyfriend and moving with her 2 girls to Germany, Andrea left him for another German man. The second German man, her cousin and Sisua explained to me, had more money. It was common knowledge that Andrea did not love her first husband. He's very fat, various sex workers made a point of repeating. Nor did her friends pretend that she loved her current boyfriend. But Andrea was lucky enough to get off the island. Now she's expected, and willingly acquiesces, to help the other single mothers in her family, and her parents and good friends, such as Elena, with remittances. She has even sent new sneakers, jeans, and belts to a circle of her closest friends, all sex workers. With so many financial expectations and demands on Andrea, there's pressure on her to keep her relationship afloat, no matter what. While women such as Andrea become symbols of all that is possible in Europe, while Nancy's friends blame her for this breakup of her marriage. After her own experience with Jürgen, Elena says Nancy never should have moved to Sisua with her husband with all these sex workers here. No man would stick around. Considering the benefits for family and even friends, it is easy to see why sex workers, sporting new fashions from Europe, perpetuate the fiction that marriage in Europe is without significant conflict. Language barriers, cultural differences, and racism are all waved aside. Life Allah over there in Europe is, for now at least, better than Aki here. Marginalized women in a marginalized economy can and do fashion creative strategies to control their economic lives. Globalization and the accompanying transnational phenomena, including sex tourism, do not simply shape everything in their paths. Individuals react and resist. Dominican sex workers use sex, romance, and marriage as means of turning Sisua's sex trade into a site of opportunity and possibility, not just exploitation and domination. But exits from poverty are rarely as permanent as the sex workers hope. Relationships sour, and subsequently an extended family's only lifeline from poverty disintegrates. For every promise of marriage a tourist keeps, there are many more stories of disappointment. Dominican women's attempts to take advantage of these walking visas call attention, however, to the savviness and resourcefulness of the so-called powerless. And that is the end of that chapter. Thank you for joining me. Make sure that you listen to part 1. Thanks. Bye.